Hello. Firstly, I'd like to wish all our viewers and well-wishers a very happy new year. May 2019 be prosperous, healthy and extremely successful. It's also great to be back. Welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen on Wednesday rejected the Chinese President Xi Jinping's call for unification under a one country, two systems approach. Tsai said her island of 23 million people would never accept the approach proposed by Beijing. One country, two systems refers to a framework similar to Hong Kong in which the territory became part of China but retained a degree of autonomy. Taiwan and China split in a civil war that brought the Communist Party to power in China in 1949. The rival nationalists set up their own government on Taiwan, an island 160 kilometers off the Chinese mainland. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the latest tensions between China and Taiwan. Joining me on the program today are Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor, Chinese Studies, JNU, Pant, Head Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation, and Ashok Sajjanhar, former ambassador. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Professor Kondapalli, I'd like to begin the program with you. You know, this issue between China and Taiwan is not something new. It's been going on for several decades now. What is the history of the problem really?
Well, in 1949, the nationalist Kuomintang party lost the civil war and they fled to Taiwan. Taiwan was a colony of the Japanese since the Shimonoseki Treaty in 1895. Till 1945, it remained in the Japanese hands. The Japanese have modernized Taiwan in various ways, including education system, railways, infrastructure, the administrative system, and so on and so forth. In 1945, it was in a limbo after the San Francisco Treaty was signed. Countries participated. Between 1945 to 1949, the Civil War was very painful for both the Communist Party as well as the nationalists. No one succeeded in this. The Kuomintang shifted to Taiwan with over 1,000 families, wealthy families, including from the Sung dynasty, who later James Sung contests as a presidential candidate recently as well. So these 1,000 families control the wealth of Taiwan. They brought in all the Forbidden City treasures as well from Beijing to Taipei, where there is also a Forbidden City now, a museum which has all these artifacts. These 1,000 families control the political levers, the economic levers, the diplomatic, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Meaning, for example, Formosa Plastics, which is a big company in Taiwan, or President Enterprises, comparable to Reliance Company in India or Tatas or Birlas. Those are all still controlled by the Kuomintang group. The Kuomintang always said till the 1986 that they want to march on to the mainland and recapture from the communists. Kuomintang also had stated the One China policy when they were in the United Nations Security Council from 1945 to 71, when they were displaced by the PRC, People's Republic of China. So they advocated the One China policy, saying that the Kuomintang represented the One China. Now, the One China policy actually has constrained the Taiwanese in terms of the diplomatic recognition. Today, just over less than 20 countries recognize Taiwan, and these are all very small countries,
right?
Mostly in the South American continent, and one in Africa, which is also switching over to mainland China, and in the Caribbean, in the Pacific islands.
Right.
So, in other words, the One China policy constrained the Taiwanese international space. Every year they apply for the United Nations under the name of Taiwan, and this is rejected by the Chinese in the United Nations Security Council. However, Taiwan today is a vibrant democracy. It's called since 1990s, early 90s, 94, 95, they have been conducting universal elections. It has 27 million population. just about 36,000 square kilometers.
Right.
That's about one third of Arunachal Pradesh.
Absolutely.
They go for elections, some 18 million of them, and it's a vibrant democracy. Today, the DPP, Democratic Progressive Party, whose constitution suggests to independence, although they did not practice such between 2000 to 2008 and now, they did not practice pro-independence movement, but still their constitution speaks about independence.
Absolutely. Okay, since we are in the present now, let me bring in the ambassador also into the picture. Ambassador, what is the situation, or what are the circumstances that have led to the latest flare-up between China and Taiwan?
You know, I think the latest flare-up really took place, there have been ups and downs. But the latest one that you mentioned is because of the address by the Chinese President Xi Jinping, addressing on the 40th anniversary to the, as he put it, the compatriots in Taiwan. And I think using very assertive language to say that China will not hesitate in using force as far as reunification is concerned. And this has also been an avowed policy also of Xi Jinping since the time he's become the president in 2012, that as far as his China dream is concerned, that would include taking over all territories which belong to China and which are not a part of it as yet. And so this is what he mentioned in this, that the one nation, two system policy, and that is what has been applicable as far as Hong Kong is concerned, as far as Macau is concerned. And this was also directed, of course, to the government of Tsai Ing-wen in Taipei, but also it was directed equally, if not more so, to what he said are the external forces that are supporting Taiwan in this, in terms of declaration of independence. And this is what has been the avowed policy of China, that any independence declaration by Taiwan as the Republic of Taiwan will not be tolerated, and even force will be used. Now, what the Americans have always said is that there should be constructive dialogue, there should be peaceful dialogue, status quo should be maintained, and there should be no attempt to use force as far as unification.
That having been said, Ambassador, is this also stemming from the fact that Xi Jinping is enjoying unparalleled powers at the moment? You know, last time someone had this kind of powers was probably in Mao's time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is because, and this is another instance of the assertiveness as far as China is concerned. And if we were to go back just a few, let's say, weeks or months before this, you know, when we had the speech by Mike Pence, the US Vice President, on the 4th of August at the Hudson Institute, immediately after that, you know, on the National Day, then the President of Taiwan, against Tsai Ing-wen, she had also been rather belligerent as far as use of words and saying that China is trying to interfere in the affairs in Taiwan. China is trying to sort of, you know, as far as cross-strait relations are concerned, because China, you know, during all these, since Xi Jinping came to power, they have been using different instruments. First is in terms of trying to wean away, trying to steal support of different countries as far as Taiwan is concerned. So you see the Dominican Republic, you see Sao Tome and Principe, you see Panama. So many of these countries have switched allegiance from Taiwan to China. Also in terms of sort of, you know, putting economic obstacles in the way of Taiwan. There were so many tourists who were going there, and those were stopped. And since the Democratic Progressive Party came to power in 2016, that was a huge win for DPP, both in the presidential election as well as the parliamentary election. Since that time, Xi Jinping, China has stopped all sort of contact. Although before that, there were positive contact. And as a result, in my view, of those, the fact that, you know, China has been pressurizing, it has been sending warships, it has been sending threatening aircrafts, bombers, etc. over the Chinese straits, that the elections that took place in Taiwan in November saw a huge defeat for DPP, which resulted actually in the resignation of Tsai Ing-wen as the president of the DPP. And that, I think, also might have emboldened Xi Jinping, that now the KMT, the Kuomintang party, they are the ones who registered very significant victories during these elections, and that might also have emboldened Xi Jinping that they are on the rise as far as Taiwan is concerned.
Right.
So this is the right occasion to make this move.
All right. Professor Pant, what is the offer really that has been made to Taiwan as far as Beijing is concerned, and why has Taiwan rejected this offer?
Well, it seems that the offer of if you read the two statements, especially by Tsai Ing-wen, when she talks about that something will be unacceptable in the kind of offer that the Chinese president is making about one country, two systems, which is sort of analogous to the system that they have with Hong Kong. I think that's the role model for them, for the Chinese Communist Party in some ways. And I think two things are interesting, because the CCP has traditionally relied on nationalism and economic growth as the two pillars of its legitimacy. And you do see a sense that economic growth is not that strong, so perhaps nationalism is something that now the CCP is going to rely more on, and I think that is a theme that you also see in Xi's speeches consistently. And I think that is, if you read it in that context, and you sort of look at the statement now from Tsai Ing-wen, saying that if you were to sit in Taipei and look at the situation in Hong Kong, it doesn't look rosy at all. After all, the commitment that was made to Hong Kong was that your autonomy will be preserved, and that seems not to have happened. If you look at what has happened, the restrictions now in terms of pro-democracy movement, if you read media, etc., it's a largely the situation in Hong Kong is not something that those at that time when the transfer happened believed would be maintained. So I think now the question for Taiwan is whether you look at that situation and you see, look, this is something that is unacceptable. So I think that is perhaps when she says, by any means we will use force, or of course the idea is to have a dialogue and to see what sort of an arrangement we come to agree upon. The best thing would be one country, two systems, like Hong Kong. I think the questions are about to be raised or will be raised as to the significance of what is being offered,
right,
and why is it that it becomes so complicated in the current scenario. And if you're looking at Hong Kong, you would not be that comfortable that looking at the future, perhaps the situation will also come to pass in Taiwan, where these things will happen. But I think that's further down the road. Perhaps what we are looking at now are two entities perhaps positioning themselves for a very hard-nosed bargain. And I don't think at the moment you would see that kind of acceptance. And also let us recognize that I think only around, I think the last survey that was done, around 3% of the Taiwanese said that they want immediate reunification.
Yeah.
So I don't think there is enough public demand also.
Yeah.
So therefore you would see that being reflected in the way Taiwanese politicians and the leadership would approach this question.
Absolutely. Professor Kondapalli, both Professor Pant as well as Ambassador Sajjanhar, brought up the issue of force being used. That having been said, how serious is this threat from China as far as Taiwan is concerned?
Well, it's nothing new. The cross rates is about 180 nautical miles, which means actually not very significant in terms of distance. The Taiwanese Defense Ministry expects 6 kinds of attacks on Taiwan from China. One is an overall invasion, second submarine blockade, which the Chinese keep mentioning once in a while. Third is an Air Force kind of attacks. Fourth, in terms of saturation strikes by the 1,800 missile systems that are located in Fujian and Zhejiang provinces opposite to Taiwan. And amphibious attacks and so on and so forth. Now, Taiwan has its own antidotes for all these. It has the Patriot Advanced Combat Systems, PAC-3 systems. It has also a highly modernized armed forces. The key question is that the Chinese have already tried this in the 1950s and 60s. For example, they bombed the Kinmen Island. There are 3 islands, offshore islands for Taiwan, Mazu, Pangu, and Kinmen. They could actually physically occupy this, but the basic question would be the cost would be pretty high. Number one, Taiwan had invested about $280 billion in China market. So Taiwan is actually a golden goose for China. If the Chinese bomb Taiwan, as they keep mentioning, threatening, you see all these investment drying up in the SMEs, small and medium enterprises. Secondly, although a white paper in 2002, the National Security White Paper in China did mention that they will not allow Taiwan to go on sine die without reunifying, which is what President Xi Jinping also reiterates now in the speech a few days ago. The fact of the matter is, while the Chinese have the military might and the cross-trade balance is in their favor, yet the other costs are very high. For example, shipping insurance rates will be going up because Taiwan is at the center of the Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific now of all the sea lanes of communications. So the insurance shipping costs will increase, and the major problem will be for the Chinese themselves as they keep increasing globalization.
So if there is an attack really as far on Taiwan from the Chinese side, the costs will have to be borne by the Chinese as well, and that's something that they don't want to undertake, is what you're suggesting. Ambassador Sajjanhar, what are the options really going forward as far as Taiwan is concerned?
You know, as far as Taiwan is concerned, although as far as the Democratic Progressive Party is concerned, right from the beginning, independence has been the goal. But still, when Tsai Ing-wen, she was at the helm of affairs from 2000 to 2008, you know, this was not an issue that they really moved forward on. Or even since she's come to power in 2016, you know, independence is not a move that they have made. I think what they're really interested in is ensuring that the status quo continues, and so that it is able to strengthen its role, as Tsai Ing-wen has said, make itself indispensable and irreplaceable as far as the international community is concerned, whether it is in terms of economics, whether it is in terms of investments. And in addition to being a very robust and a dynamic democracy, it's also economically a very robust country. So in that sense, you know, whether it is USA, whether it is EU or Japan, I think these are the partners that it is looking up to, that, you know, it will strengthen its relations with these countries who will be supportive. It will become sort of indispensable as far as they are concerned. So I think going forward for them, the best option is to maintain the status quo. Because if you look at it, you know, even from, let's say, the 1990s till now, if at that time there were about 35 to 40% of the population, 23 million population on the island, which claimed, you know, that they had some affinity towards China, today that number has come down very significantly. And in that sense, Taiwanese nationalism, that has come up in a very big way. You know, earlier what was about 15 to 18%. Today there are more than 55% who identify themselves as Taiwanese nationals. So I think as far as the DPP is concerned, even as far as KMT, because, you know, when they were in power, KMT was in power from 2008 till 2016. There also at that time their intent also was to have better economic relations with China, and that is what China used during that period, thinking that more interdependence or more economic dependence of Taiwan on China will make this linkage more acceptable. But unfortunately, that has not happened. So as I mentioned, you know, the elections that have taken place in November, so that must have given some thoughts, some ideas that China right now is on the winning wicket. But it is my own assessment that it is less to do with what the people think in terms of reunification with China, and more in terms of the economics that has acted against, that has not helped DPP in terms of registering very significant performance there.
Right. All right. Professor Pant, you know, Taiwan, let's not forget, has got the support of the United States as well. If things escalate any further, do we see the Trump administration playing some kind of a role going forward?
Well, I think that's inevitable. I think America will have a major role in whatever shape this crisis escalates. It has always had a major role. I think the question is, with the Trump administration, the unpredictability is so severe that I think the alliance partners are a bit reluctant to rely completely on Washington at the moment. But I think the larger relationship between Taiwan and Washington is very significant. If you see the kind of debates that happen every time the defense authorization bill comes into the U.S. Congress, that's a very significant debate in the U.S. polity about what should be the U.S. role in Taiwan and what are the larger contours of that role. It has shifted here and there, but on balance, it has been very steady commitment to, I think, as was pointed out earlier, to maintaining status quo in the region and to see that no one changes the status quo by the use of force. Now, if you recall, when the Trump administration had come into office the first few months, even before his oath-taking ceremony, he had dialed in. He had talked to the Taiwanese president, and it had raised such a brouhaha that maybe he's going to change America's policy on Taiwan. But then he went back on it, and then he, one commitment to one China policy came into being. And I think that perhaps is an element which also would be a factor in the way Taiwanese leadership now looks at an issue. And I think with the present leadership, what we have seen is an attempt towards diversification in its foreign policy. And I think India is a very important partner in that. If you look at especially this government in Taiwan, Tsang's government, they have tried to look at India as a very, very important partner in their foreign policy outreach. The whole approach is very different, and it is significantly invested in reducing economic dependence on China, which I think is a major factor in the way they look at the future. Because if you remain as dependent as you are on China, I think the question of independence becomes rather moot. But if you start diversifying, thinking about what your other stakeholders potentially can be, then I think you can definitely play a balance of power game in the region where you can protect your autonomy to a certain degree.
Right. All right. Quick closing comments now from all my guests, starting first with you, Professor Kondapalli. The tension between China and Taiwan, what implications does it have on the region?
I think in terms of the regional security, regional economic development, there is a lot of tension that is going on in the cross straits. But for the new government in Taiwan, the new southbound policy has been announced of linking up with Southeast Asia and South Asia. To that extent, I think there is a renewed focus on this region, Southeast and South Asia. In terms of India, while India recognizes the One China policy, as External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj mentioned, China doesn't recognize One India policy. To that extent, I think a reciprocal arrangement, including on Taiwan-related issues, needs to be arrived at between India and China. If the Chinese go ahead with the CPEC projects, there is always the prospect for India to develop relations with Taiwan, especially in terms of economy and trade and so on and so forth. So matching the One China with One India policy since 2014 has been mentioned. So this is one area, especially given the Taiwanese stakes in the region. Number two, Taiwan also has about 40% global hardware, IT hardware. They manufacture over 1 million motherboards a day. Semiconductors and so on, and have invested heavily in the foundries in Chennai. And Foxconn is shifting from the China market to Pune and other areas, in terms of the Apple products and so on. So to that extent, I think there is a necessity for India to also look at this issue afresh. In terms of these IT and the ICT technologies to tap into the Taiwanese market.
Absolutely. Ambassador, what's the best way forward really as far as both China and Taiwan are concerned, and where do you see all of this headed?
I think this is not the first time that it has happened, but China today is a very, very different commodity from what it has been in the past. And in terms of actions that has been taken, particularly if you look at whether it is a South China Sea or otherwise, it is being much more assertive and much more aggressive in its relations. I think the best would be in terms of maintaining the status quo going forward, and as Taiwan has said, as the President of Taiwan has said, in terms of enhancing, expanding its linkages, also ensuring its national security, its defense preparedness, also in terms of its domestic economics, expanding the social security net. As far as India is concerned, one comment I would like to make is, in 2010, when the Chinese Prime Minister had come here, the One China policy was not a part of the declaration. I think we need to be cognizant of that. And ever since then, none of the bilateral documents has made reference to One China policy, which has been wherever Chinese leaders go, it is always there. And also in 2014, when Prime Minister Modi was inaugurated, the head of the representative office of Taiwan was also invited to that oath-taking ceremony.
Yeah.
I think there is much that India can do, particularly looking at the southbound policy that has been enunciated by the government in Taiwan in terms of economics and in terms of people-to-people contact. Education, I think there is lots that India and Taiwan can do together.
Absolutely. And Professor Pant, close the show for us with your concluding remark.
Well, I think what is significant is that the Chinese president has made these remarks as much to the Taiwanese people and to the political leadership in Taiwan as to the international community. And I think it is incumbent on the international community now to figure out a response to this problem. This ebb and flow between Taiwan and China will continue. But how do you respond to Chinese provocations will also become a marker in Chinese behavior going forward. So I think it's important for countries like India also to articulate a response to these challenges as India becomes a greater stakeholder in the Indo-Pacific security.
All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it on this edition of The Big Picture. See you again next time.